Oh, sorry, I was rejected.
Right. Good morning, everybody. I want to first thank the sponsors for this morning. My father-in-law, Ronnie Benin, Eli Benin, Morris R. Benin, Morris Dweck, A.B. Mimi, and Saul Towel. And special thanks to Saul Towel for organizing this morning and suggesting it in the first place. Saul L. Towel. And Lee Greenberg. Thank you. It's our honor and pleasure to have with us Rabbi Dr. Natan Slifkin. Again, he was here some years ago. It was a while back. Many times. He is the director of the Museum of the Biblical Museum of Natural History. I encourage everyone to make that part of your itinerary on your next trip to Israel. Fascinating things that he has there. He's also the author of over 10 books. Each one of them learned, important, well-researched, well-written, and there are many that are for sale, and the rabbi can sign them for us right afterwards. He's also the author of a popular blog, Rationalist Judaism, that is the subject of many of our family chats and synagogue discussions, and always bring us up to date on all the important issues that are going around in Israel and in the Jewish community. So first I want to say kol hakavod, thank you for all of the great work and everything that you have been teaching us over the years. And with that, we're very honored and looking forward to hearing about Torah and the army. Bechavod.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Before I start, anyone who's by any chance driving to the 5 towns afterwards? Anyone? I guess you don't know. Okay. It's really a great pleasure to be back here. This shul has got a very soft spot in my heart for this shul. I think I first came here 18 years ago, something like that, 18, 19 years ago, right, in the Ronnie Hirsch days. And it's wonderful, big fan of the Shama, the community, really, really wonderful to be here. Okay, so I'd like to begin with I don't know if you can help me out with a survey. I want to ask a question, curious to see what answers are given. And this survey is only open to people who do not read my blog. Okay. The question is as follows. As we all know, there's a whole issue going on with Haredim not wanting to enlist in the IDF. My question for you is, what is the reason? What is the reason why Haredim do not want to join the IDF?
They're saving the country.
They're
holding up the country.
How?
They're saving.
They're learning Torah is protecting the country. Is that okay?
They're scared.
Scared?
They don't want their lives uprooted, and they want to remain enclosed, sexually out.
Okay. What you say?
Fear of the rabbis, them becoming less religious.
Fear of becoming less religious.
There are some leaders, the Goyim, who, because of political reasons and beginning of Zionism and secular Zionism, they will not ever do anything Zionistic, and that's I believe the basic reason.
Okay, so the first thing I wanted to alert you to is we've heard some different things. Right, we had a bunch of different reasons here. It could be there's truth to all of them. Could be that some are true. Could be some are not true. One thing I want to stress, though, is that when somebody gives a reason for something, that's not necessarily the actual reason. I'm not saying a person is necessarily lying. A person may believe they're doing something for reason A, but really they're doing it for reason B, and they're not aware of it. All right? So let's now, with that in mind, let's now address the basic topic. So, obviously, in Tanakh, there's a lot of discussion about wars. And there's discussion about how in certain types of war, certain people are exempt, right? Somebody who just got married, somebody who just built a house, somebody who planted a vineyard, right? They have a certain exemption. Somebody who's afraid, don't want them in the army. But certainly in the Torah, in the written Torah, you don't see anything at all about an exemption for learning Torah, right? There's no mention of that. And there's an idea some people propose that there's a tribe of Levi, that they do not fight. And based on a certain reading of Rambam, it could be that anyone who's learning Torah is an honorary member of the tribe of Levi. Now, there's a few problems with that. Number one, who says that you can just choose to be a member of the tribe of Levi? Right? When you look at what Rambam is speaking about there, basically he's not giving a halachic discussion. He's speaking about a certain ideal, about people who devote themselves to spirituality. It's not like you can suddenly start getting Misa. You can say, I'm going to learn Torah, I'm going to be like the tribe of Levi, and then I can get Misa. No, it doesn't work that way. It's speaking about a certain, ideal. But in terms of the tribe of Levi itself, something very interesting we see in the Torah. When Moshe Rabbeinu comes down from Har Sinai and he sees the Jews worshipping the Egel HaZahav, the golden calf, and he smashes the Luchot, and he says it's time for the people to be punished, and he says, Mila Hashem Elai. So who comes to him? Rabbi Levi. And what does Moshe say to them? With your bare hands? With the swords. Right. How many, now, with your weapon? Now, if you're around Israel today, there are certain types of yeshiva students who have weapons, right? My son, who's in yeshiva Malot, right? He has a gun because he's also part of the IDF. But, if you go into Mir and Ponovich and so on, you're not going to see many people with weapons. Right? But the fact that the tribe of Levi had swords and they knew how to use them, right, shows that obviously that they were involved in wars. And the general understanding is that the tribe of Levi may not have been involved in expansionary wars, but when it comes to defensive wars, right, to just securing the basic homeland, that they were involved. Okay, so. And also, it's the kind of thing where if there was an exemption for learning Torah, it would mention it in the Torah. It would say so. You'd find some kind of mention to it. And you don't. You don't find any reference to it anyway. So then you come on to the idea that many people say that, okay, but nevertheless, the fact is that Torah has this protective role. Right, that the Torah protects the Jewish nation, and therefore people who are learning Torah, that is their role. Right, that is their role in place of serving in the IDF. They are protecting the nation by learning Torah. Now, the way to come to that conclusion is by taking some sources and basically totally misreading them, and doing so by way of the fact that the word Torah is very vague and ambiguous and can be used to refer to all kinds of things. Right? And I'll give you an example. So one source that's popularly cited, this is a drasha in the Gemara, based on a pasuk, Amdot hayu agleinu b'sharecha Yerushalayim. Our feet were standing at your gates of Jerusalem. And Rabbi Shua ben Levi explains it to mean, when were our feet standing in war? When were we victorious in war? Sha'arei Yerushalayim hayu oskim b'Torah. By virtue of the gates of Yerushalayim, which were busy with Torah. So superficially, that seems to be a clear source saying that victory in war comes about as a result of learning Torah. That's what it seems to say. But if you analyze this source a little bit more carefully, it's not saying anything of the sort. It doesn't say, Omdos haragleinu beglal talmidim b'yeshivot shahayu lomdim Torah. It says, Sha'arei Yerushalayim shahayu oskim b'Torah. Now, what are the Sha'arei Yerushalayim? That's not yeshiva. What's the Sha'arei Yerushalayim? What was located at the gates of Jerusalem? The courts. Right, it's talking about the courts. And it doesn't say lomdim Torah, it says oskim b'Torah. Right, the courts were what's the name of osik b'Torah? They were
Executing judgment.
Executing judgment, exactly. Exactly. It's not talking about people learning Torah. It's talking about the courts enacting the laws of the Torah, ensuring a system of justice for society, right? And in the zechut of having a law-abiding society, right? One which follows the laws of the Torah, that was a sort of merit to be successful in war. There's nothing to do with learning Torah. All right, but you see an example of how people latch on to the word Torah, and all of a sudden, oh yes, it's a source about learning Torah, being successful in war, without looking into what is the context? What is it actually saying there? And what's interesting, by the way, is that the author of that section of the Gemara, Rabbi ben Levi, he appears on a different Gemara too, where there's a discussion about whether you can expose yourself to people who have a very contagious, very serious disease. And there's several of the Chachamim who say, well, no, obviously not. That would be a very, very bad idea. And Rabbi ben Levi says, I don't mind exposing myself to it because my Torah will protect me.
Very done.
And the others disagree with him. The others say, no, we are not going to, you're going to rely on that, fine, but we are not going to rely on that. Now, how many people today would follow Rabbi ben Levi in that? I'm not talking about COVID, which was not so the most drastic thing in the world. I'm talking about something really nasty, right? Yellow fever, whatever it is. How many people are going to say, I'm a yeshiva bacher, I can expose myself to that, no problem, my Torah will protect me. Yeah, nobody would do that. So this very same Rabbi ben Levi has ideas about Torah protecting, which people do not follow in practice today.
Unless you're a doctor.
Yeah. And this is the kind of thing that you'll see again and again when people will talk about sources about Torah protecting. It's speaking about it doesn't mean what they're taking it to mean. Torah magna umatzla, right? That's the phrase that's bandied about all the time. Torah magna umatzla. Torah protects and saves. And they say, so that's showing that people learning in yeshiva are protecting the state of Israel. Well, no, it's not. You look at the original context in which it appears. It's talking about protecting from the Yetzer Hara. It's talking about protecting from suffering to a certain degree, but not protecting from death. Maharshal says it's clearly not talking about protecting from death, right? And so you have these Mamari Chazal, these statements which are can be interpreted in all different ways, and they want to interpret it to the maximum. To mean Torah Magna Matzla means military protection for the entire Jewish people by people learning Torah and yeshiva, and this is not what the sources mean. But the other interesting thing is, it's not just me arguing that the sources don't mean that. It's that to what extent do the people saying it really believe it themselves? There's a difference between it when someone believes something and when someone believes that they believe something. And those two things are not exactly the same. And so, we'll have and there's ways of doing litmus tests, right? So, for example, fine, let's imagine some horrendously contagious disease going around, right? Rabies, God forbid, right? A scourge of rabies going around the community. Right? And there's something like that. And there's a theory that if you eat chocolate, it will protect you from getting this disease. So people would want to know, right? Well, how much chocolate do you have to eat? And how often do you have to eat the chocolate? And, and how close do you have to be to someone with disease when you have to start thinking about eating chocolate? In other words, if this is something which your life depends on it, right? You're staking your life on it. So you'd very much want to know what the parameters are. But in this case, this claim Torah protects. Do we see any care to find out what the parameters are? Is it geographically concentrated? Does Torah protect more closer to where the person learning Torah is? Is it? Is that what they believe? Yes or no?
No. Imagine not.
No, but then there was the idea that the Chazon Ish said Bnei Barak is protected because of the Torah there. So then I think maybe they do believe it is geographically concentrated.
Torah was attacked in Yerushalayim.
Yeah. But they talk about Bnei Barak being protected because of the Torah. So maybe they think it is geographically concentrated. So is it or isn't it? And how far does it extend? And is it just protecting yourself or is it protecting other people? There's no interest in working out or discussing what these parameters are. Does it protect at nighttime? Or does it protect less? Does it protect less at nighttime when less people are learning? If that's the case, maybe it needs to be around the clock. What about Bein Hazmanim? 10 weeks of vacation. How much vacation can you take before the amount of protection starts falling off? There's no interest in exploring the parameters of it, right? And that's one indication that it's not something that's being taken seriously, right? Staking something on it. It's funny. it's about 10 years ago, was it Protective Edge? One of the previous Gaza rounds in Gaza, where there were rockets being fired a lot on Ashkelon and Ashdod. So there was a yeshiva, I think it was the Grodno yeshiva from Ashkelon, that relocated. They fled and they relocated to Bet Shemesh, where I live. And there was an interview in the newspaper with the head of the yeshiva, and they said, yes, we've come to provide our spiritual iron dough to the residents of Bet Shemesh.
It worked.
Yeah, it's like my magic spell that keeps wild elephants out of Bet Shemesh. Hasn't failed yet. Exactly. It's not Bet Shemesh that needed the iron dome, it was Ashkelon. Right? So if you feel that you can provide some protection, Bet Shemesh isn't the place that's needed. Right? So it's obviously, it's not something. If a belief is real, you stake something on it. Right? I believe the brakes in my car work, so I will drive at speed because within the limit. But but I believe that I have an ability to stop my car from moving, which is why I can drive. Right? I really believe it. But if someone is never willing to stake anything on a belief, then it shows that belief is not really very sincerely held in the first place, and with good reason, because there's no basis in Judaism for it. Right? So why we hear so much of it, this idea about Torah protects, basically it's a way for people to feel good. Right? It's a way to feel good about themselves. That people can convince others and convince themselves that, yes, we're doing our bit in the war also. We're doing also our crucial role. But it's something that falls apart in so many ways. You'll say to people, okay, they're saying they need to have 80,000 people in yeshiva. That's Israel's survival depends on it. Well, what about in 1948?
But half of them were not in yeshiva anyway.
Okay, but putting that aside too, that's also a good point. But how many? So how did we survive 1948? How do we survive 1967? You had a few hundred people in yeshiva. So I'm not saying you can't contrive an answer to that, but the point is, it is such an obvious question, and they don't even think about it because there's no thought being put into this. Right? It's just something to say, which seems to be grounded in Judaism, and it certainly makes people feel good about themselves. So it's something that they will believe they believe, right? They feel good about it, but it's not something that withstands any scrutiny, right? Any critical evaluation. Yeah.
But what about when there's a vote in Bet Shemesh? Don't they stay and learn and set a vote so this way they can get the right mayor?
Well, it's a separate topic. But also stretching out to that, the idea that spiritual work, learning Torah, davening, replaces material endeavor. That's the essential idea being said, right? That spiritual service replaces material endeavor. That is something that has absolutely no basis in classical Judaism. And I'm not being a rationalist here. I'm just saying classical Judaism is that you do what is ordinarily required. Ein sovden el hanes. You can't rely on a miracle when it comes to life and everything in life. You do the regular hishtadlut, you do the regular work, and you daven that Hashem will give you, additional help, additional support. But never does the Torah or the Tefillah replace the material endeavor. And again, our Charedim also, whatever they say, also believe that. Because when it comes to every other sphere in life, right, they do the material endeavor. You do the hishtadlut. Right? When it comes to medicine, right, they go to the doctors, they take medicines just like everybody else. Right? And they're not going to say, oh, Haredi towns need less hospitals. Haredi towns need less kupat cholim because our Torah protects us.
Plus vaccines.
Right? They don't say that. When it comes to politics, right, or politicking, right? So when they're worried that there'll be an unfavorable political decision, so they go out and protest. They don't say, oh, we're going to learn Torah and that will protect us. So they don't believe that the Torah will protect them from the Knesset. You claim they believe the Torah will protect from Hamas and Hezbollah. So obviously, no, they don't rely on Torah to protect for anything. With the army, it's a matter they can get someone else to do it. But it's not that they sincerely believe that learning Torah replaces hishtadlut for anything at all.
They're just praying that all the other Jews will protect them.
Yeah.
That's what they're praying.
Yeah. Very often, when people come to my door collecting for yeshiva, I say to them, okay, so what did your yeshiva do during this war? Is this a Hester yeshiva? No. So we learn Torah, we daven for the success of the war. I said, great. And I said, and that's like, is that like just as powerful as fighting in the army? Like, yes, it's even more powerful, even better. Okay, great. I said, you know what? I want to help you, Yeshiva. I'm going to help you in a really good way. I'm not just going to write a check. I'm not going to write a check. I'm going to learn and daven for your success. And they're like shocked. And sometimes I'll say, okay, the fellow, well, okay, yes, thank you, yes, that's great. I said, yeah, good, I'm glad you appreciate it, and that's what you should do to everyone you ask for. Don't ask for money, ask them to learn and daven. There you go.
It came right wrong door.
But that's it. What's important there is, to get you have to recognize the absurdity, right? They don't believe that learning and davening replaces material effort. They don't really believe it. But what to do is you have to get them to acknowledge that, like in the movie Inception. You can't force an idea into someone. You have to get them to realize it, right? So you have to get them to realize that no, they do not believe that the Torah and Tefillah replaces material support. Okay, so it's not about Torah replacing support. So the other alleged reason why they don't go to the army is because they're worried that it'll be religiously harmful, right? So one very often sound, they're worried it will be spiritually harmful. I'll talk about how so many guys who go to the army become irreligious, right? So we don't want that to happen to our kids. How can you expect us to risk the spiritual safety of our kids? Okay. So the response to that is twofold. Number one, the statistics that they throw around. Like last week, they were throwing out a statistic of half the people who go to the army become irreligious. This is a very misleading statistic. Firstly, it's not half. But second of all, they're confusing two different groups, probably deliberately so. In other words, when a religious boy goes to the army, there are different ways of joining the army. Right? There's all different ways. You can just go straight into the army, where you're mixing together with all other Israelis. You can go to yeshiva mechina first, which gives you, a year or two of spiritual grounding. You can go to Hester, or my son did, which is a combination of yeshiva and army service. First you start in yeshiva, then you go to the army. When you're in the army, you're going with your whole yeshiva crowd, guys, and then afterwards you go back to yeshiva with them. Right? So the ones that the high dropout from religion, which do take place, occur with the guys who go to the army in general. Right? But the guys who are going to yeshiva tracks within the army, so the dropout rate is minimal. Right? And the guys who are dropping out are the guys who don't go to these tracks, and partly it's because they're not in those tracks, and partly it's because the kind of guys who are not going to the yeshiva tracks are the guys who are less religious to begin with, generally speaking. Right, so, but obviously, Charedim who would go to the army would be going as part of Hashmonaim, right, as part of these programs, and there's absolutely no reason to think that there will be any significant dropout from religion. The opposite could happen, right? Often you have guys, it's not as if nobody drops out from religion in Haredi society, right? They do. And often those kinds of people, if they had a framework, like an army-type framework, that would help motivate them to be stronger in their religion. But
how come all the years in yeshiva before they go to the army doesn't give them enough rights to stay with religion?
Because
I think that the Rabbonim in that respect fail.
Yeah, agree. Now, there's another aspect which is as follows. Let's say yes. There is a certain spiritual risk in going to the army, right? Which I think is quite likely true. There is a certain, for everyone, right? Even if you go, so there is a certain spiritual risk. And there's also another risk, you get your head blown off, right? That's a risk, isn't it?
Yep.
There's all kinds of risks in the army, and yet, well, what are you going to do, right? Yeah, that's what we have to do, because there are people who want to kill us, and we need an army to protect us. So people take risks. All right. And by the way, the Torah recognizes not just that there's physical risk, but also that there's spiritual risk. Yifat Torah. Right, what's that talking about? Where the soldier takes a liking to a non-Jewish girl, a member of the nation they're fighting against. Obviously, not an ideal situation. Right? This is not something that the Shadchan was planning. Right? The parents are not going to be thrilled at this new daughter-in-law. Right? But what can you do? It's a difficult situation, so the Torah tries to work it out as best as it can. Right? The Torah is recognizing that yes, there's going to be spiritual challenges. The army it's a very, very challenging thing in many ways, and it can be corrosive of character. Right? You get used to killing people. That's not good for character in Judaism, to get used to killing people. right? David HaMelech couldn't build a base of Mikdash because he had blood in his hands, right? So for sure, yes, there's horrible things that can happen in the war, horrible things, but that doesn't mean you don't do it. You know, it's interesting. What is the mitzvah going to war? So people will talk about Milchemes mitzvah, right? Milchemes mitzvah, as Rambam says, Ezra Yisrael Miyad Sar, right? Saving the Jewish people from an enemy. And then some people will argue and they'll say, well, no, it doesn't fit the technical criterion for Milchemes mitzvah because maybe Milchemes mitzvah is only when there's a proper melech, maybe it's only when there's an Urim B'Tumim, and we don't have that, so it's not Milchemes mitzvah. So, you know, there's two rejoinders to be made to that. First of all, is that, well, I mean, according to most poskim, it is a Milchemes mitzvah. Milchemes mitzvah means a war of survival against those who are trying to kill you. You know, can you imagine, God forbid, you know, a group of Hamas terrorists breaks into some Haredi yeshiva and starts, you know, slaughtering people, and one guy's saying, no, but according to this chapter, it's not a Milchemes mitzvah because there's no B'Tumim. Like, come on. All right. But second of all, Rabbi Lichtenstein says, in his essay on the ideology of Hester, he says, the mitzvah of going to fight, it's not just about Milchemes mitzvah. Right? Milchemes mitzvah is one, you know, very particular, you know, very specific halakha. Rabbi says serving the army is much broader than that. I said it's basic chesed, right? Chesed is, you know, one of the foundational pillars of the Torah, of Yahadut, and that's what being in the army is. Right? What greater chesed, what more basic chesed is there than helping people, helping your nation who are under attack by those who want to kill them? Right? And that's something which, you know, I've been trying to stress over and over again during this war, especially with the reservists, right? The unbelievable, you know, burden on the reservists, people who've been away from their families for months and months and months. You know, the museum, the Biblical Museum of Natural History. So we did various types of ways of helping people in the war. We gave free admission for all the evacuees. We did animal-assisted therapy for traumatized kids. Ideologically, we have a new role in explaining how the animal world of the Torah shows our connection to the land of Israel. That's the topic of my new book, The Lions of Zion, that I have here, which refutes the claims that Israel is some European settler colonialists who stole the land from the indigenous Palestinians. But one of the things we did was subsidized fun days for families of reservists. And it was heartbreaking and heartwarming. You know, it was heartwarming to see how much they appreciated it. We did all these activities for their kids, but also heartbreaking to see these stories of these. Basically, it's been all these single mothers, right, for most of 2 years. And where's the idea of chesed? You know, the reason why all these people have been away from their wives and children is because, you know, there's an IDF manpower shortage. You know, I was having an argument with a Haredi guy, and he's like, yeah, I understand, you know, you believe in the army because you're a Zionist. You know, you believe Reshit Tzmichat Gulotenu. But we don't believe in that. I said, what are you talking about? I said, I have no idea. I said, I'm not such a hardcore Zionist. I have no idea if it's Reshit Tzmichat Gulotenu or not. I'm not a Navi. How do I know? But I do know that there's 7 million Jews living here. That people are trying to kill us. All right? There's nothing to do with Zionism. It's just people trying to kill us. We need an army to survive. And, you know, and everyone needs to chip in. So, you know, it's talking about, you know, basic chesed. It's not as though Haredim believe that we don't need an army. Right? They believe they're not conscientious objectors, right? They're not against the idea that Israel should have an army. Right? It's not like you know, Peter Baynard or whatever. No, they want there to be an army. They don't want to be in it. Okay, so we said that it's not about learning Torah, and there's no justification for the idea that it's about fear or becoming irreligious. But neither of those are the real reason why Haredim don't serve. The real reason why Haredim don't serve, by the way, back at the last point, like I said, it's not as though all the Haredim are in yeshiva. Some are very seriously, and some are in yeshiva casually, and some of them are not in yeshiva at all, and some of them are even barely religious. And even the guys who are barely religious, even those guys, you know, the leaders of the Haredi community are saying, you know, they shouldn't go to the army. You know, those guys that could even be strengthened religiously in the army. Okay, so what's it all about? So really, the question's being asked wrong. It's not as though you need to ask, why do Haredim not go to the army? Let me put it this way. It's not that you need a reason for them not to go to the army. It's that you need a reason to go to the army. How many people here joined the US Army to fight in Afghanistan? Nobody? I'm so surprised. Going to the army is a really hard thing, right? It's a very, very difficult, demanding thing. It's not the kind of thing that average people, you know, are just jumping to do. All right? Why would somebody go to the army? Somebody would go to the army either because there's a whole culture of it, right, or because you feel very passionately about, protecting the people who are being threatened, and you feel the sense of, mutual responsibility, right? Civic duty, right? A sense of civic duty. What's civic duty? Right? You feel a sense of responsibility to the collective that you're a part of. And Haredim just don't have that. They do not feel that way. Because being Haredi is ultimately about being separate. Right? It's about having a separate identity from everybody else. So in the same way as, obviously, if you're living in Tsarist Russia, you're not going to, enlist to the army in protection of the Tsar's empire. So why would they join the Zionist army in protection of the state of Israel? And in terms of the people of Israel, so you can say, okay, but what about the people of Israel? What about the Jews living in Israel? They don't relate to them as being part of the same nation. Right? And that's why, these things may sound shocking, may sound harsh, but if you analyze Israeli society, you see that is the reality. Right? It's a very separate social identification where they don't see themselves as being part of the same nation. Yes, it's a terrible burden on the reservists. So we feel that because we identify with reservists. We probably all know people who are in the reserves and so on. But then they don't know it's not their community. This is some very remote strangers. Just this last week, so there's a group of Haredi rabbis who came out with a psak, an actual psak halacha, that it's forbidden to go to the army. And they said and there's a deal they're trying to work out with the government right now, where the government will basically give a legal exemption, providing a very, very small number of people who are not learning, will enlist. And they said, no, you can't even do that because ein dochin nefesh mipnei nefesh. All right, what's ein dochin nefesh mipnei nefesh? You don't push aside one soul for another. That's a principle that appears in the Gemara that let's say, the Roman Empire is demanding that you hand over a couple of Jews or they'll slaughter everyone in the town. So you cannot choose which Jews to hand over. You can't say this Jew's life is worth less than the other person's life. All right, so ein dochin nefesh mipnei nefesh. So they said, no, even though really they claim it's about learning Torah, but even the guys who are not learning Torah, they can't go to the army. We're not going to send them to the army either. Ein dochin nefesh mipnei nefesh. Now, what about hold on? What about all the nefesh of the people who are in the army? Right? What about all the non-Haredi Israelis who are in the army and have to work much longer and have to serve much longer? So why don't they see ein dochin nefesh mipnei nefesh applying to that?
Not
part of us. Right. Someone asked me yesterday, but what about it's in halacha that they had Perish Minat Tzibur, right? What about Perish Minat Tzibur? Rambam says that somebody who's Perish Minat Tzibur, right? Somebody who separates himself from the community of Israel, right? Even if they're doing all the mitzvahs, keeping all the halachas, but they're not part of the community. It doesn't. The communal tragedies don't affect them, don't upset them, right? So Rambam condemns them. Ein lem chelik le'em haba. So why don't Haredim see that as being an issue?
It's the other way around.
Exactly. Because from their point of view, we're the ones who are the Persian and that Tzibur.
We're the Tzibur.
Huh?
The people.
From their point of view,
Yeah.
they're the Tzibur, and we're the ones who are Persian and that Tzibur. Right? Now, wait, hold on, I'll take this soon. Hang on. I'm just going to get through some key points.
Sure.
Now, so in actual fact, I would say that in theory, it could be a morally consistent position. Right? It could be a morally consistent position that, in the same way as, if imagine Jews living in Poland, right, in the 1930s, right, don't want to draft to the Polish army, right, or the Tsar's army, right, you don't feel any moral obligation to draft to the Tsar's army because you don't identify with that nation, right? So too, they don't identify with the nation, so they don't have an obligation to enlist. They're a separate community. So in theory, that could be, a moral position. The problem is that if that's the case, you have to take it all away. Right. Yes, if you are a completely separate religious community, then there's all kinds of ramifications that come with that. Right? Then basically you're appealing to Israel to come up with a new category. Right? There's Zionist Jew, there's Haredi Jew, and there's no reason why Zionist Jews should have to fund Haredi Jew if Haredi Jew sees itself as having no obligations to the state of Israel. Why does anyone else have obligations to them? All right, so I'm saying it could be a moral position, but only if it was carried all the way through. This kind of selectivity that, yeah, well, in some ways, we're not part of Israel, and we don't have an obligation to help in a war. In another case, yes, we're all part of one people. You know, we need you to support and fund our Torah. Right, so there you have the hypocrisy.
Well, we also have Arabs that are exempt.
Right, right. So some people say, oh yes, Arabs are exempt, so why can't we be exempt? Okay, so do you want to be treated in the same category as Arabs? Is that what you're saying?
But all the Arabs around us don't want to kill the Arabs. They only want to kill
Yeah,
the Jews.
right. Do they really want that? Do they really want to be treated in the category of Arabs? Right. Obviously they don't. Right? They want to have it both ways.
Even the fact that they participate in the election in a
Right.
secular government is opposite of what they
Yeah.
believe.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm more respect for Satmar. Satmar at least has some, internal consistency.
Sure, they do it.
What? Internal consistency. Yeah.
I just want to ask, you bring in a lot of sources. What about one of the key sources for me? You know, the famous story Moshe, with the two tribes that come to him.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a good one. I think we very little.
It's right there in the.
So it's right there in the Torah. Right. So I used to
Answer that.
How do they answer that? So they use that pasuk. Right, when they're trying to say get a rally together, a political rally, and they're trying to encourage people to join the political rally against the government, against the draft. So that is a pasuk they use to bring people out to the rally. It can be a real hard temptation to Pope, right? Again, which it's so absurd, but at the same time, that's really the explanation, right? That for them, like with Ein Poshim and Tzibur, right? Everything is just inverted. They are the Tzibur. The war is the war against the Jewish people, which is them, and everyone has to join to fight in the war against the Torah.
It's upside down.
Yes, exactly. It's like completely opposite. Now, the question is, so what do you do about all this? So what do we do about all this? So, and by the way, yeah, sorry.
I just want to add to the before you say we're supposed to do that, there's the incentive structure that's built, right, for them to stay out of the army.
Yes.
Being paid.
Yes, right. So that gets to what we do. All right. So the question is, what do you do about this? Because obviously this is a problem. Obviously it's a problem. The price paid by the reservists over the last 2 years is just unfathomable. Goodness knows what wars are in Israel's future. Well, we're going to need a very big army, and if we don't have it, we're going to be in serious trouble. And by the way, and this is far from the biggest threat that the Haredim pose to Israel. What is the bigger threat? The economy, right? Fashioning the economy. That's a much bigger one.
Also going to be the majority of the
Yeah,
country. And
right. Right. So what do you do? So what do you do about all this? So ultimately, if there is hope for a solution, but if there's a solution, it will only happen at the ballot box. Right? It depends on anything. Most of the funding comes in government funding. We're talking tens of billions. And I'm a big believer in the idea that necessity is the mother of hashkafic reinvention. Right? Necessity is the mother of hashkafic reinvention. Right? When there's a very strong need, drive to do something, you'll find a hashkafic way to justify it. All right. So right now, as you said, it's very easy for them. Right? It's very easy for them. But as it becomes, if they're out of the government fully, by now they've lost a certain amount because there's no draft exemption law in place. They've lost a huge amount of funding, but there's still plenty of other ways in which the government is able to channel monies for them. All kinds of other ways. But if they were out of the government,
It was a windfall. They came to our community and raised over $100 million on the thing that we're losing government funding. It was a windfall.
Yeah. I don't know how successful they actually were in raising it. They claimed they raised it. I'm not so sure if they really were so successful. Okay, so
Excuse me.
right. So how long? 1 second to get to this point. So yeah. So if the government falls, or if the government ever falls, and they're not in the next government, then we're talking about a huge reallocation of finances, and that can make a change. And it's not that you're going to get 80,000 Canadians to enlist in the army. It's not going to happen. There's absolutely no way that will happen. We don't need that. You need, say, 20,000. That's what you critically need. You need 20,000. And if the funding is cut, you'd get that or close to that. And also you'd have a kind of snowball effect. Because a lot of people don't go because it's, societally, socially, unthinkable. Right, it's not on the radar. But once you get a few guys going, then it's something that becomes culturally, socially acceptable, and that could have a snowball effect. So there definitely is hope for change. I wouldn't say it's there's no hope. There is hope. It depends on the elections. At the same time, another way that happens is because the money is the main thing. So it's true, most of the money is government money, but also a lot of it is private donations. Right? And it's crucial for outside people who do not identify with the Haredi rejection of civic duty to not support Haredi institutions. But not only to not support it, to say why. Right? To communicate a clear message. This is why we are not supporting you financially. One thing that bothers me is that I have many friends who all have kids in the army, and we all feel very strongly about it and very upset. My son, who just went into active duty last week, he's on the Lebanon border, and he's going to have to do 70 days reserve duty every year minimum till he's 45. 70 days. How's he going to get a job? Would you want to employ somebody who's taking off 70 days a year? Right? It's very, very upsetting. And you ask people, but friend, I say to people, you got to speak up. You got to speak up to your Haredi friends and neighbors and explain why this is wrong, because they think we're fine with it. Right? Haredim, especially the Anglo-Haredi community, they believe that we are all fine with what they're doing, that we respect them for it, that we view them as being the ideal form of Jew. That's what they believe, that we believe. I promise you, that's what's drilled into them. That's what's drilled into them. And if Mishpacha magazine ever quotes, beginning of the war, they quote some people with kids in the army, and they made sure to only interview people who said, "But we respect those who are learning Torah, and we admire them for it." All right, so they all think that we respect and admire what they're doing, that we see them as the real authentic Judaism. So, and people are nervous to speak out. So obviously it's uncomfortable, especially if you're. If you're Anglo, you don't like to speak up. I don't know how it works in Syria and so forth. But people you don't want to make a fuss and say, no, we really object to what you're doing. And I say to them, we expect our kids to be brave enough to go into Gaza. Right? What's the bravery that we're being asked to do? Just to speak up in a socially uncomfortable situation? If our kids can go into Gaza, we can summon the strength to do that. So I think it's really, really important on every level. People say, what are you trying to accomplish with my blog and all this? So it's many things. It's that people in our circles, it's not that some Haredi guy reading my blog is going to change his mind. Although sometimes there is such a thing that you plant a seed, and even if the person rejects it, that seed takes fruit many years later. I've seen it. But it's more like helping people in our community understand our ideology and what it's really about. And make people realize that, no, there has to be a campaign. There has to be a public campaign to make it politically toxic to support our way of life, and to send a message to people in the Haredi community that, no, this is unacceptable. This is a threat to the state of Israel. This is causing tremendous hardship on those of us who do serve, and we're not okay with it, and we are not going to support you for it. We'll daven and learn for you. Do you find that acceptable? No. All right, so let's be real. Davening and learning is not an acceptable way of fulfilling civic duties. And this is what I feel we are obligated to do. Yes.
Yes, you mentioned earlier that we don't exchange one Jewish life for another.
Yeah.
But when the Gedolim say that it is against halacha to go into the army, they are basically choosing who will die and who will live. Because when you go into the army, somebody will die.
Right. I had that.
What right do they have that?
All right, I had that. I had mentioned there was a time. It was last year. There was a certain Haredi public speaker, Mordechai Neugeschel, who came to Rabbi Shemesh to speak about why Haredim don't go to the army. And he was speaking in a big Haredi shul, and I was a little bit afraid to go and challenge him. It's quite easy to challenge somebody behind your computer keyboard, but it's another thing to go in person in a hostile audience of 200 people. So I was very nervous. I was very, very nervous, and I wasn't going to do it. But then I thought of this point that I said earlier. I'm expecting my son to be able to go into Gaza, and I'm afraid to go into a shul. Right, so I said, no, I've got to summon the strength. So I summoned the courage to go, and at the end, he gave an appalling talk. And at the end, I stood up and I spoke, and I have a recording of this on my website. And one of the things I challenged him with was I said, okay, so you've given all the reasons why you don't believe Haredim should go to the army. What about Datiim? Should Dati Leumi yeshiva students go to the army? Now, this is a question that they're not used to being asked, and they're stuck. Right? Why are they stuck? Because according to the logic of what they've said, that Torah protects and all that, so also Dati Leumi yeshiva students should not go to the army. But of course, they want Dati Leumi yeshivas to go to the army because they want there to be a big, strong army, and the combat troops are largely Datiim. Right? The Haredi politicians, they're the ones voting to extend the length of duty for all these Dati Leumi yeshiva students because they want there to be a strong army. But they can't say that. So, he wouldn't give me a straight answer. He would not give me a straight answer.
You didn't expect it.
Right, because they're not used to being asked that question. Right? Should Datiim go to the army or not? So obviously, ultimately, they believe they should, but they can't say it.
But
Yeah.
what is the deeper reason for all of these things, at least from my perspective, is that in the last whatever century or more,
Mhm.
the Gedolim of previous generations, they indoctrinated. They said, you've got to keep away from these people. You've got to close in.
Exactly.
You've got to protect
Yes.
because they're a bunch of goyim,
Yes.
and you call them goyim, and that philosophy is basically the same philosophy today amongst the Haredi yeshivot. They are indoctrinating similar to the way the Muslims
Right. So essentially, it grows out of isolationism. That we're going to develop our own distinct
and
identity.
it's their religion. And
Right.
the Muslims say whatever they're doing, only they deceive behind the
Right.
scenes, and the Jewish ones look. But
Right.
they're
And
very
instead,
simple.
orthodoxy itself
Yeah.
said that
Yeah.
we are going to slightly step away and have our own defined community.
Right.
And ultra orthodoxy did that to an even greater extent.
And it's the
And-
core of everything they do.
Right.
Everything after that falls.
Right. In other words, it's like they once said, there was some Haredi Rav who once said, if the government says that everyone should learn Bava Metzia, we're going to learn Bava Basra. Right? It's the idea about, being separate, being distinct from everyone else. So the problem is, what they don't take into account is the idea of growth of numbers. In other words, a certain isolationist way of life may have been fine when you're, a couple of thousand people living in Russia. But when you're over 1 million people in a small country, it doesn't work.
But you have to be able to confront them about this very subject on their level.
Right, so there was an interview with,
and he have a very good answer to them about. Yes, we don't want to sit on a bus where a woman's going to be there and just like look at that shiksa and so on and so forth. They're not the let's call it the Dati elite community or whatever you want to call it, the more normal people don't have a good defense against them on that level. Yes, everything you're saying is true, but on that level, they don't have a good defense.
What do you mean?
They don't answer them. They don't answer their questions well. They're not.
A lot of people don't know the right
their
things to ask.
philosophical.
They'll say exactly. I saw this. There's an interview with Corey Sean where the interviewer said, "We Datiim, we also believe Torah protects. We don't believe that Torah protects in place of soldiers. We don't believe that. We shouldn't believe it." But I would say also, it's like there was an interview with a Haredi MK a couple of months ago. I can't remember which one it was. When the interviewer said to him, "So what will be when the Haredim are in the majority? What happens when you're in the majority in Israel? You can say you're not going to be in the army, you're not going to be economically self-sufficient, how will the state survive?" So he said, "It will never happen. We will never be in the majority."
They'll change.
And the interviewer said, "Well, what do you mean? It'll never happen. What if? No, he couldn't answer it, right? Because he can't answer it. Because there is no answer other than saying we would have to change dramatically, and he can't acknowledge that option.
Unfortunately, there will be a tipping point when they reach a certain
The
percentage
problem is the lag.
that the regular troops are going to leave.
Right, exactly. And that's the
So
problem.
that's the
Because the change takes longer, the crash comes, right. So that's right, it's a very, very serious situation. It is an existential threat to the state of Israel. And the only, it's not a very pleasant thing to say, but it is a fact. And the good news, I would say, is that finally people are recognizing that. In other words, 10 years ago, I was yelling, it's an existential state to the existential threat to the state of Israel, and people thought I was crazy. Now everyone's saying it. Like, Makor Sham had an article with that exact title: "Haredim are an existential threat to the state of Israel." So, if there's anything good that came out of this horrible war, it's that people are waking up to this very, very severe societal problem.
Rabbi, it's a much deeper threat. It's a much deeper threat that.
He's trying to answer the question.
Okay.
20 minutes.
I'd say a few rebuttals.
Okay,
First of all,
Good to have
this
pushback.
thing started in 48 with Ben Gurion and the religious people when he said status quo and people didn't have to go to Yom. At that time, there was no people in Israel. There was a few people.
that was 400. That was 400 people. The problem was Begin gave it.
There was a few people learning. The people grew. They took advantage. And something like this, the words that you use are also insulting to the Haredim because this thing could only work through compromise. And the elders of those generations are eventually going to go. The younger kids today, Israeli, even the Haredim, I think they believe they want to fight for the country.
A small
But
number.
they're told not to. You know, and as for incorporating it to the IDF is like a goyish cult. It really is. They don't accommodate religious Jews. They
Not
don't
true.
promote
Hashmonaim. They have Haredi frameworks. Hashmonaim.
Jews. Let me say what I
Yeah.
have to say.
Yeah.
I think I'm kind of very knowledgeable about it. They don't promote really religious Jews into higher parts of the military.
Okay.
They
So what?
keep them out, and you have to adopt to them. You have to create battalions that are religious. Open up religious parts of learning for them to incorporate them. You need them. You can't-
My son is in an army unit with 37 guys, every single one of whom he went through yeshiva with and is returning to yeshiva with.
And you have to negotiate with them to get them. You can't go and say they're an existing threat to the country. They're part of us. That's just.
But that's exactly the problem. They don't see it that way.
But that's just doing what the media want you to do, create civil war in Israel.
It's not creating, again, this is the thing that really bothers me. People tell me I write about these things that I'm harming Achdus. I am not harming Achdus.
Unity.
I am pointing out that there is no Achdus. I'm pointing out that there is no Achdus is not harming Achdus. They don't feel part of the nation. It's not just the army, right? So they don't fight. So how about chesed? How about, hospital visits? They don't do that either. They don't do that. They're not interested. They're not interested. They're not interested. They're not interested. They don't identify as part of the nation. Don't diversify the questions. This.
There's stories that take the Mishkan to battle.
What?
There are stories in Tanakh that they take the Mishkan to battle. So there's a concept of having to battle. So there's a concept of having Torah close to battle.
Yeah.
So why can we orchestrate something similar to it? The Kollel should be
on the borders.
What?
They should be on the borders now.
They should be drafted for the purpose of studying Torah.
Very nice.
In areas that.
But what are you saying? You're saying, and then the Haredim will agree to it? They're not interested. It's not interested in any of that. Yeah.
Even the ones that don't wear it should.
Yes, it's on sweater. Everything is question is important.
One point.
Yeah.
The roots are much earlier than my mentor Ronnie said. Since the Bar Kokhba revolt and the decrees, the terrible decrees that came out, Orthodoxy or whatever was then, let's say, rabbinic Judaism, turned into a non-violent, sort of let's keep our heads low and let's pass.
Yes.
How did that work out?
A new ethos came into the world when Zionism came, secular Zionism, we have to say, and the state, and that ethos has not yet been adopted. So that actually the Haredim are continuing with it's part and parcel. And even if you could find the sources, and you could find sources, there's the Pesik of Kahana that says these are the stories that there's sources.
Right. Rabbinic Judaism developed after the loss of sovereignty, and it was developed for that type of situation where you're a small minority, weak population.
It's that new ethos that has to be.
Right. And Haredim have not made the change, the adaptation. Yes, that's also very, very much a part of it. Right. And again, it's used to thinking of themselves as we are a small minority, living under a foreign government, and therefore we don't need to take responsibility for things.
And that ethos is more in line with the Talmud, with the general tradition of Talmud. So what we require is really a major change. It's not do that, Lord?
Yes, it's a very good point. In other words, they see, Zionism as going back to Tanakh, and but we're the traditional Jews. But because you have a new reality, that you have a Jewish majority in the state of Israel with sovereignty, and once you have that, you have to start thinking about things like, okay, an army, and all these
That's
things.
considerable of Torah.
Right.
And then you get into that.
Right. They have not made the adjustment to the fact of the new reality. Right.
But they also somebody.
Sorry. Okay, I don't need to give everyone a turn.
As Will said, I just heard Melanie Phillips recently said we've gone from a Talmudic period to a Tanakh period.
Yeah.
And that's where the change is happening
Right.
today. Second, they don't think we know Torah. They don't
Right.
think
That's also
Talmud
true.
wasn't-
Yes. Right.
And also, why don't we hold them accountable? If October 7th happened, that means there's a failure in their learning.
Right. Yeah.
You don't hold them accountable. I think so much time will live it says any person who takes it, it's far from the army, every bit of the Torah is like a road.
Right.
Well, you also.
Yeah.
I want to expand the process of what you're saying. Here, in America, in this community, for example, we all look at Israel as our land, our country, our people.
Mm-hmm.
So what is our obligation for our children and grandchildren to help to actually go fight for Israel?
So a very good question. So I don't think it's obligatory. I don't think it's a few for Jews in America to go fight for Israel.
Why not?
Huh?
Okay, why?
Because ultimately, the level of responsibility you have, depends on many factors. If Haredim were to say, we're not going to serve in the army, but we're not going to vote, we're not going to take a budget, right? I think people will be okay with that. Right? Once you're saying something, once you're saying, you vote, you get state benefits, you get government benefits, that creates a much higher level of civic duty. So for using the Chutz La'aretz, I don't think there's an obligation to fight in the army. I think it's a wonderful thing. I think it should be encouraged, right, for people to go serve. And I think it is obligatory to help Israel, but it can be helped in other ways. Serving in the army is not the only way to help Israel. Financial support is also extremely important. Political activism is important.
Fellow Jews are at risk. Why isn't it?
I think it's hard to make it a chiyuv. Being in the army is it's a very difficult thing. Right? It's very, very difficult, and there are Americans, British people who go and do it. A lot of people, it's very hard if you don't grow up in that culture. It's an extremely difficult thing to do. I think it's too much to say it's obligatory. Yeah. Yeah.
Just from my observation, actually, that's what I heard Ben Shapiro say it.
Mhm.
And I think that you're being too soft, and I'll explain to you. He said, when
I don't get that often.
because you said, well, if they give us 10 or 15,000, you said,
Yeah.
we don't need the 80,000 that they're there. 20,000. If it's the law of the land that everybody serves, then everybody has to serve. And if there's a penalty for not serving, then it has to be equal.
Oh, agreed.
He said 20 years ago on college campuses, on the Hillel, can we bring this speaker? He's a little bit left. Well, you're Jewish. You could use it. And they brought the speaker, and then the next speaker. They used, the Slolinsky concept. They used all of the values to undermine the position. The next thing you know, you had a Palestinian speaking in a Hillel.
Yes.
So I would say, if the law of the land is everybody serves, then the law of the land is everybody serves, and the penalty is the same for the Haredi
I agree.
as the leftists that
Right.
say some of the seculars don't go to the army.
Right. The penalties that have anything. Yeah.
And don't say we'll take, and you have to do some sort of community. And don't say, well, we'll just take enough to fill the manpower shortage. Then let the guys go 20 days of reserve instead
Right.
of 70 or 30.
I agreed. I believe that everyone should serve.
So-
And I believe that even the idea, well, we need to have some people learning Torah. No, the Torah that they're learning, I don't believe is the right kind of Torah anyway. It's not a Torah of national responsibility. What I'm just saying is, as a pragmatic, political solution.
But that's compromise, and that doesn't.
Politics is the. And how are you going to do it though? How are you going to make them serve?
They're going to have to run on that platform.
That's right.
They have to run on the platform of.
Right, you can cut off the money. Prison is pointless. Prison doesn't do anything. But there's be a thing that if you're not going to serve, okay, see, we're not going to finance you in any way.
Not a solution for the Haredim. That means anybody who avoids it
Yes.
shouldn't go.
Right.
Gotta be equal.
Right, so I do not believe right. There has to be penalties for not serving.
Getting back to your saying, something that we can do, something that we can affect. as opposed to us complaining about everything else, which is legitimate and all that, but we're not gonna have any effect on it right here. You said something very key, political activism.
Yes.
We have to be involved in our politics here in America. We have to fight for Israel through our politics and get involved in APEC. And that's everybody's responsibility in this.
Right. So it's on national security. You have to be politically active in Israel. You have to support causes in Israel, the right causes, not the wrong causes. Right. And vis-a-vis the Haredi world, you have to not support Haredi causes, but more importantly, tell them why. Say to the person, this is why I cannot support what you're doing. Yeah.
First of all, I just think it has to be like acknowledged that we're very, very privileged to hear from you. We're very privileged to hear from you. And I feel like we have a lot of hakarat tov for the fact that your son is serving and standing for the values that this shul really stands for. Like hearing Rabbi Barry's question, we know that he has grandchildren. So I think also having Rabbi Barry and I saw Lauren Grunfeld in our community have had children in the army, so that just.
I recognize you. Yeah.
And the second thing I wanted to say was I feel that we sit in our own echo chamber in this room, though.
Yeah.
And so, and sometimes when I read your articles, I love that, but it's my same voice. So a part of me says, what is your message to us as individuals who are very often in our own echo chamber and might not have access to outside of our echo chamber? I think it's amazing. You went into a Haredi yeshiva and you spoke to them. Wow, unbelievable. Well, what should we do? Is really my question, because I think that's super courageous and super brave. And we can all try our little part if we're in education or I don't know, whatever. We try to all help the world.
Right.
So like, what's your real message to us if we live a lot in our own echo chamber?
So I don't know, everyone has a different, situation in life, a different, abilities to reach people. You're right. If you are completely ensconced in a perfect hermetic social bubble, then there probably isn't much. But assuming that every now and then, I think people's lives are complicated, and you do, interact with other people, and there could be various situations where this topic comes up, and it's just it's useful therefore to be able to advocate for this point of view.
Rabbi,
We're out of time now. Yeah. Thank you very much. Hold on a second. If you want to buy my books, I have my books here, including my newest book, The Lions of Zion, available here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I just went on Kindle.